Welcome to my channel. The Brazen Bull, burned alive in metal effigy. Episode 1, A City Silenced by Fear. Akragas, a magnificent city on the southern coast of Sicily, stood proudly atop hills overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. From afar, its white marble towers shimmered in the sunlight. But beneath the city's grandeur lingered the scent of death, unseen by the foreign merchants who came and went. Behind the city walls, Akragas harbored a silent fear that suffocated its people. His name was Phalaris, the ruler. A tyrant who rose to power not through inheritance, but through blood. He came from humble beginnings, yet was driven by an insatiable thirst for power and glory. At the beginning of his reign, he promised security and prosperity. But over time, his face morphed into that of a monster, obsessed with absolute control. Phalaris believed one thing, that fear was the true foundation of power. In the heart of the city stood a grand hall, the site of the tyrant's gatherings. There, he sat upon a golden throne, surveying his people like pawns on a chessboard. He was notorious for punishing those who dared to speak out, especially those who defied him openly. On the other side of the city lived a man named Melanthios, a philosopher and artist. He was neither noble nor soldier, but through his words and ideas, he shook the foundations of the tyrant's regime. Melanthios was known for his fiery speeches about justice, and his writings, passed secretly from hand to hand in the dark corners of the market, that championed a dangerous but simple ideal: freedom of thought. When tongues are silenced, then the pen shall speak, Melanthios wrote in one of his manuscripts. The words found their way to Phalaris's ears, and boiled his blood. But Melanthios wasn't the only key figure in this opening act. Enter Perilos of Athens, a metalworker and inventor, hungry for recognition. He arrived in Akragas with something the world had never seen before, a horrifying creation he described as both art and justice. Perilos presented his invention to Phalaris, a large bull made entirely of pure bronze, hollow inside, spacious enough to fit a grown man. Perilos proudly explained that when a person was locked inside and fired beneath the sculpture, the screams would escape through specially designed pipes at the bull's mouth, emerging as the deep, majestic bellow of an enraged bull. Phalaris smiled. That day, the skies over Akragas looked clear. But for this city, a dark storm had begun to gather on the horizon of history. And none of its citizens knew that the first voice to echo from within the belly of the bronze bull would not be that of a criminal, but of the very man who created it. Episode 2, The First Flame Ignites. That day, the grand hall of Phalaris's palace was filled with advisors, soldiers, and craftsmen. Standing proudly in the center was Perilos, eyes gleaming and chest puffed with pride. Before him stood his masterpiece, a colossal bull gleaming with golden hues, cast entirely from pure bronze. He had named it, the Brazen Bull. "My lord," Perilos began, his voice brimming with enthusiasm, "with this device, your hands need never be stained with blood again. Let justice speak through the sound of the roar." He pointed to the mouth of the bull, where intricate chambers had been designed to transform human screams into the sound of a mighty beast. The advisors stared at the object with a mix of awe and horror. But Phalaris? He only smiled, a thin, cold, deadly smile. "You're certain this device works as you claim, Perilos?" Phalaris asked, his gaze sharp as a blade. "I am, my lord. And if you wish, I could demonstrate. With a volunteer." He chuckled lightly, assuming it was a jest. But Phalaris was not a man who appreciated jokes. "I want to hear its sound. Now." The room fell silent. Perilos swallowed hard. "My lord. I meant it only as a simulation. No human should. Phalaris raised a hand, and armed guards stepped forward toward Phalaris. If you truly believe in your creation, then step inside it. Phalaris frowns. He laughed nervously again, but no one responded. Consider it a royal honor, Phalaris said flatly. Phalaris begged. He fell to his knees. He wept. But tyrants do not know mercy. Phalaris held one unwavering belief: all cruel inventions must first be tested on their creators. By force, Phalaris's trembling body was shoved into the belly of the bull. A hidden door on the statue's side was sealed tightly. Below it, the executioners began lighting the fire. At first, the room echoed only with the crackle of burning wood. Then came the sound. A scream. That scream soon transformed into something strange, an eerie bellow, echoing through the hall like the roar of a living bull. The advisors glanced at one another. Some looked away in disgust. Some lowered their heads. And some were in awe. Phalaris stood. He approached the statue, staring into the cold, empty eyes of the bull as thin smoke began to rise from its nostrils. "Beautiful," he whispered. After what felt like an eternity, Phalaris ordered the fire to be extinguished and the bull opened. The scorched but still breathing body of Phalaris was dragged out. He coughed, groaned, his body trembling violently. But the tyrant was not yet satisfied. "You must taste the fruits of your own invention, mustn't you?" he said coldly. "But don't worry, I will grant you a perfect death." With a single gesture, he ordered the guards to throw Phalaris's charred body from the high cliffs outside the palace. The inventor's body struck the jagged rocks below. Thus, he became the first victim of the very creation he had crafted with his own hands. Episode 3, The Roar That Silenced the Truth. After the tragic death of Phalaris, the Brazen Bull was not hidden away. On the contrary, Phalaris ordered it to be placed in the central square of Agrigentum, atop a high stone podium. He turned it into a symbol of his grandeur and so-called justice. Standing before his people, Phalaris, clad in a deep purple robe, raised his hand high. "This is a tool of purification," he proclaimed, "for those who defy the law and the truth of the state." But not everyone was convinced. In a modest house on the outskirts of the city lived an elderly man with a brave soul, Melanthios, a philosopher who once taught logic and ethics to the youth of the city. Now, he had become the only voice daring to condemn Phalaris openly. "Phalaris is not a martyr," Melanthios told his students. "He is merely the beginning of a cruelty that will burn all who dare to think." His words began to spread like a small flame among scholars, poets, and artisans. Whispers emerged, secret gatherings were held, and messages appeared on walls. The bull cannot hear the truth. But of course, whispers rarely escape the ears of palace guards. In the dead of night, Melanthios' house was raided. He did not resist. Calmly, he surrendered himself. His eyes held no fear, only the clarity possessed by someone who knows that life and death are merely trials of conviction. In the palace, Phalaris stared at him. "You know why you're here?" Melanthios gave a faint smile. "Because I spoke. And because you're more afraid of words than of swords." Phalaris clenched his anger. "You will become the next lesson. This time, not because you forged the bull, but because you refused to kneel before it." The day of execution arrived. The city square was packed. Many lowered their gaze, unable to bear the sight of the device, no longer just metal, but a symbol of agony and terror. Yet Melanthios stood tall. Before entering the Brazen Bull, he looked up to the sky and spoke loudly. "Let this roar be the voice of all who were silenced. Let my body burn, but let the idea live on, in the minds of those who dare to think." Tears welled up in the eyes of the people. Even some guards looked shaken. But orders were orders. Melanthios was locked inside the belly of the metal beast. The fire was lit. And once again, the sound was heard, the scream transforming into the roar of a bull, a death song forced into grotesque performance. Yet that night, something was different. Across alley walls, citizens began to write. Melanthios burned, but the idea blazed brighter. While Phalaris laughed behind the palace walls, he had no idea that from the ashes of a philosopher, a fire was rising, one far more difficult to extinguish. Episode 4, Inside the Belly of the Bull. The final hammer strike echoed through the square of Agrigentum. The sun had vanished, leaving the sky drenched in the crimson glow of twilight, as though nature itself was mourning what was about to unfold. The Brazen Bull stood tall in the city center, majestic and monstrous. Its belly was now open, gaping like the mouth of a demon ready to consume a human soul. The townspeople gathered. There was no cheering. Only silence, sharp as a dagger. Among the crowd, Melanthios' pupils bowed their heads. They no longer wept, tears had run dry, replaced by fury and fear. Phalaris, donning a purple robe and a crown of metal, stood proudly atop the stone platform. Beside him, Melanthios, bound, but upright, as if no chain could silence the clarity of his mind. Melanthios of Agrigentum, Phalaris declared, with your arrogance and elegant words, you have sown rebellion in my land. Today, you shall become a lesson to all who choose logic over loyalty. Melanthios looked at him, calm. If speaking truth is a crime, he said, then history will remember how power feared the voice of conscience. Phalaris growled, his face flushed with rage. He signaled. Two early executioners dragged the frail philosopher toward the Brazen Bull. The metal was cold against his skin, but the old man did not flinch. He closed his eyes, not from fear, but from readiness. The bull's belly was shut and locked. Beneath the stage, guards began to stoke the flames. Dry wood crackled as the small fire roared into a blazing inferno, licking the belly of the monstrous bull. The Brazen Bull began to glow, then redden, then burn. And soon, the roar was heard. But it wasn't a human scream. The bull's internal mechanisms, specially designed pipes by its original creator, turned the wails into horrifying sounds that mimicked the groans of a wounded beast. The townspeople shuddered. Not all sounds can be masked, and not all feelings can be deceived. But inside the Brazen Bull, something happened, something no one, not even Phalaris, could have foreseen. Melanthios, in unbearable heat and pain, did not scream as expected. He sang. With a rasping voice, he recited poetry, verses of Greek philosophy about justice, about courage, about death as merely a doorway to eternal truth. Of course, eventually, his body succumbed to the scalding metal and the agony of burns. But before his voice faded, one final line echoed through the groaning Brazen Bull. Truth cannot burn. It will rise again, on the tongues of generations after me. Phalaris stood still. He turned his face away, but something inside him trembled. The crowd said nothing, yet they knew, power may have won today, but Melanthios' voice had pierced through metal, and time. And the bull's roar, from that day forward, never sounded the same again. Episode 5, Echoes from the Belly of the Bull. The night had passed. The last embers beneath the belly of the Brazen Bull were dying, leaving behind a thin trail of smoke that rose into the morning sky. The air in Agrigentum that morning felt heavy. The city, usually bustling, now seemed subdued, as if time itself was in mourning. Inside his palace, Phalaris sat in silence. His head was bowed, eyes staring far ahead, yet seeing nothing. In front of him, a piece of white cloth lay on a carved wooden table. It was the only remaining possession of Melanthios, a small scarf that had fallen before he was taken to the bull. The silence of the morning was broken only by hurried footsteps. A court advisor entered with a tense expression. "My lord," he said quietly, "there are whispers among the temple priests and citizens. Many are taking Melanthios' death as a bad omen." Phalaris gave no reply. But in his heart, he already knew. He had heard it, not just from the people, but from the voice that spun in his mind every night, the screams of Melanthios, which no longer sounded horrifying, but haunting. The next day, at the marketplace, a group of young people distributed small, handwritten leaflets. Fragments of Melanthios' teachings, about justice, wisdom, and the noble meaning of life. No one knew where the copies came from. But everyone who read them felt something difficult to describe, a spark of courage, gentle but piercing. Among the crowd stood a young man, a former student of Melanthios, his eyes alight with fire. He raised his voice. Melanthios' body may perish, but his words will never fade. Truth cannot be imprisoned in a brazen bull. Some people turned to look. A few smiled faintly, others nodded. Even the guards seemed uncertain, torn between breaking up the crowd or listening further. At the palace, Phalaris stood on the balcony overlooking the public square. His gaze landed on the bronze bull, now blackened and cold. In the distance, the young man's voice floated on the wind. Suddenly, the voice was no longer just one. One by one, other voices joined, like waves building in strength. Phalaris gripped the stone railing. For the first time, the power he had held for years felt fragile. He drew a long breath, but his chest felt tight. "Is this the price of immortality?" he murmured. He turned around and walked back inside, leaving the shadow of the brazen bull behind. A small step, perhaps the beginning of change, or a sign that history was about to judge him. And out there, the echo of Melanthios' voice never truly faded. Episode 6, Shadows and Legacy. The dusk slowly bowed over the city of Agrigentum, bathing the sky in a warm yet sorrowful orange-red hue. A city once known for brutality and fear was gradually changing, leaving behind the dark shadows of its past. Phalaris, the tyrant who once ruled with an iron fist and a frozen heart, now stood alone atop his grand yet silent palace. From the high balcony overlooking the city, Phalaris' gaze fixed on the towering bronze bull statue, the symbol of his infamous cruelty. But this time, it was not just the flames and smoke surrounding the statue that caught his eye, but the long shadows of sadness and regret that shackled his heart. His once strong and proud body now felt weighed down by the burden of sins and restless doubts. In the distance, the voices of the people drifted faintly, filled with whispers of hope and a newfound courage sprouting from the seeds of Melanthios' teachings. The young man once branded a traitor had become a beacon in the darkness, a figure inspiring change and liberation. Melanthios taught that true power does not come from fear and suffering, but from justice, compassion, and genuine humanity. Phalaris felt a surge of mixed emotions, anger at himself, deep remorse, and a longing to make amends. He realized that the power he had gained through cruelty did not bring happiness, but destruction and wounds that were hard to heal. As the evening breeze blew gently, he began to reflect on his life's journey, the choices he had made, and what it truly means to leave a legacy. Meanwhile, in the streets of Agrigentum, life began to stir again. Children ran laughing joyfully, chasing away the shadows of fear that once bound them. Merchants opened their stalls with renewed spirit, as if welcoming a new era different from before. Prayers and hopes replaced whispers of fear and threats, marking a new chapter for all the inhabitants. The story of Phalaris and the terrible Brazen Bull became a legend remembered not only as a tale of cruelty but as an eternal reminder of the consequences of tyranny. Every generation recalled that behind power seized by violence, there is always a turning point leading to justice and new hope. The dark shadows cloaking the past could never erase the small light that lives on in the hearts of those brave enough to stand against oppression. As the sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon, Phalaris remained standing there, in meaningful solitude. He knew that although his past could not be changed, there was still a chance to redeem himself and learn. The true legacy was not in statues or power, but in the lessons passed on to the next generation, that humanity must always be the foundation in leading and living together.